So, welcome to Tara Institute. My name's Damien, and I'm leading this month's Monday nights. The topic that I'll be covering, I don't know if I've got a simple title for it, but it's basically trying to address the disturbances in our mind. You know, trying to address the disturbances in our mind and trying to identify them, and then finding ways to diminish those disturbances. So, my own background is that when I first met or encountered Buddhism was in a share house, and I was very fortunate that I'd come into that share house through one friend, and then there was another person in the house who happened to be the SPC at Tara Institute at that time. And I was having some relationship problems, and he gave me some simple guidance from the Buddhist thought transformation ideas in dealing with that problem. And so my entry into Buddhism was particularly through this door of thought transformation. And for my own experience of Buddhism ever since has been pretty much focused on this idea of thought transformation. Transforming your thoughts and your experience by understanding the errors in your thinking and then applying an antidote to that. So, to some degree, for many years, my reaction to the sort of statement that Buddhism is about being happy and being free from suffering, and I would sort of think, really? Like, I would sort of somehow think that was a trivial pursuit, and not my sort of approach to Buddhism. But with time, I have come to accept the sort of the deep truth and profundity of that statement that I wish for happiness, I want happiness, and I want to be free from suffering, and similarly all living beings want happiness and want to be free from suffering. But I would say it probably took me 20 years to sort of accept the profundity of that statement. So, as I say, my interest in Buddhism started from this idea of thought, and then my introduction to Buddhism was on the basis of this practice of thought transformation, and certainly my interest in Buddhism has always been very much along the lines of thought transformation. So, and we can talk about thought transformation in a lot of different ways. So one of the ways that we can look at thought transformation, even on this, like, for instance, I say the refuge prayer, and I say the refuge prayer primarily for my own benefit, to try to, modify my motivation and to try to lift my motivation to be the highest possible motivation for me. Let's say, like here, teaching Monday nights, to try to make my motivation the highest that I can in even this sort of class like that. And similarly, we're encouraged as listeners to also to raise our motivation to be the highest that we can possibly make it. And so in Buddhism, in this tradition in particular, we're encouraged to have a motivation that, I am teaching, I am listening, I am meditating, I am reading, I am contemplating, I'm meditating, I'm practicing, I'm doing prostrations, doing mala, whatever, all the different practices, I'm doing them out of a wish to benefit others. So that the sort of key motivation is focused on this idea of benefiting others and then being able to benefit others in the highest way possible. So that from the Buddhist point of view, that means developing your own qualities to the fullest level of development, so that we have all of the skills, all of the powers, all of the potentialities, all of the methods to be able to benefit others skillfully and in the best way. So even sitting here tonight, even if it's your very first time, to think, I would like to benefit others, I would like to benefit others, and in order to benefit others, I probably need to improve myself a little bit. You might think, I need to improve myself. Okay, I need to have a little bit more skill, a bit more wisdom, a little bit more love and compassion, a little bit more caring, a little bit less self-centeredness, a little bit less anger, all these sort of things. We can address that within ourselves. So to increase our motivation, improve our motivation. So there's an analogy in Buddhism about coming to a teaching, particularly coming to a teaching or studying or reading a book or something, and to not suffer from the three faults of a cup. So a cup. A cup can have three different faults. So the first fault is that the cup is upside down, and so it will hold nothing. Then the second fault is that the cup has got a crack, and so whatever goes into the cup quickly drains away, and nothing is retained. And then the third fault of a cup is to be dirty, and so whatever then goes into the cup becomes contaminated. So the analogy is that we can suffer from those same three faults when we come to a teaching or we listen to a teaching. We can be completely blocked off, possibly due to our own, let's say, lack of openness. We're not open, so we're sort of blocked off. The cup is upside down. Or we can come in with very strong views of our own, like either from other traditions or just our own thinking, our own philosophy, and we hold that very tightly. And so whatever we hear then becomes contaminated by that let's say, prejudice. We call it, prejudging, something that we've already come loaded with. So a prejudice in that sense of the word. A preloaded software in our brain, something that we've already made up our minds, and we're not open to any revision. So it colours everything we hear. And one of the aspects of that, which is very interesting, is that if you come in with a very strongly formed philosophical point of view, you'll find that sometimes that what you hear, you think, oh, that completely agrees with my own point of view. So you actually project your own point of view onto what you hear, and you say, oh, that agrees with what I already believe, even though it may actually be in contradiction. And it can be very difficult to see that influence of prejudice within yourself, where you hear something, but you colour it with what you already believe. So that's something to be on guard about, and it is a problem. And then the third one is the crack in the cup, where you sit and you listen, oh yeah, yes, but nothing is retained. And so we sometimes we need to make a little bit of an effort to retain what we hear, to retain what we read, and to put it into practice. Because if we don't retain it, it then does not go into practice. So just that's a traditional example of this, a good approach to listening. So, like I say, for a long time I would think that the sort of cliche statement, I want to be happy, I want to be free from suffering, I sort of devalued the importance of that statement. But I've come to see that it is actually a fundamental truth. And for us to understand, within our own operation, how that sort of fundamental way of behaviour actually manifests. So the Buddhist approach is very much saying that we are habitually prone to ignorance, to anger, desire, to hatred, to pride, to jealousy. And those habituations then, let's say, for instance, anger. That our habituation to anger and our perception of a circumstance that arises anger within us causes us to take that fundamental principle of I want to be happy. So on the basis of that fundamental wish to be happy, in conjunction with anger, I then harm others. I insult others, I abuse others, I deceive others, I hurt them, I maybe physically strike out, I undermine others, I belittle, I talk behind people's back, I pull other people down, I destroy their reputations, on the basis of this conjunction of the delusion of anger in conjunction with my wish to be happy. Right? And it's very important to understand that. I think it's very important to understand that it's this conjunction of, for instance, my anger in conjunction with my wish to be happy. Or it's the conjunction of my desire and my exaggerated attachment, the exaggerated attractiveness of some other person or something or some possession, an exaggeration of the beauty or the appearance or the source of perfect happiness in some person or some object or some circumstance in conjunction with I want to be happy. And so then I engage in lustful behaviour or deception or strategy, treachery to try to achieve what I perceive as a source of perfect happiness. And the exaggeration of that object of perfect happiness itself ends up deceiving me, because that object can never live up to that exaggeration. And so at some point, I feel totally deceived and betrayed by my own exaggeration. So this, I think, as we get older, I think, people keep saying, "Oh, we've got to get young people to the centre, young people to the centre, young people." I keep on thinking, young people think everything is a dream. They think life is fantastic. I think it takes quite a few years under your belt till you start to see the let's call it the deception of life. It takes time for us to understand that deception of life. And that deception of life is on so many different fronts. Our view of ourselves, our view of others, the view of our circumstances, so many different fronts we have deceived ourselves. So the practice of thought transformation in the bigger picture deals with all of these different aspects. And so there's, many, many different aspects of how we can transform our thought. But the key aspect of all of those different applications is the correct perception of my own thinking. The correct awareness of my own thinking, my own processes, my own prejudices, my own self-deception. So the big question in Buddhism is, how do we get to a point where we have the tools that can enable me to really see clearly my own thinking, my own coloration of the world, my own projections of the world, and the projections of myself as well. So this comes down to this quality of mind called introspection, the ability of the mind to see, really to see clearly what's actually happening in your mind. So in meditation, we are told, that meditation is about these two factors, mindfulness and introspection. So as a beginner, we apply mindfulness. So we enter a meditation, and let's say, for instance, we're going to focus just on the breath. So the object that we've chosen for the meditation is the breath. And so mindfulness holds that object from one moment to the next moment and to the next moment. So technically then, mindfulness is like memory. It's remembering the object from one moment to the next moment and not losing it. So that's the sort of the core meaning of mindfulness, memory. We've decided to hold the breath as our mental object for the meditation, and so mindfulness is holding it from one moment to the next moment. And then introspection is a sort of a part of the mind which looks to see if that's happening correctly. That there's nothing else sort of creeping in, changing the direction of our mind. So we lose the object of meditation, through distraction, let's say through distraction, but prior to actually losing the object of meditation, there's a thought arising in our mind which is keen on going somewhere else. There's sort of an instigating thought, being attracted to something else, a different thought. And so introspection is the awareness of that process. And so through introspection, we sort of say to mindfulness, get a good grip on that object, hold on to that object. So the introspection is sort of like a watchdog of our mental distraction and preventing mental distraction. So these two things work together. Now, ultimately, if we become good meditators, we abandon introspection. There comes a point, and let's say it's a very advanced stage, but there comes a point where the tool of introspection is abandoned because it itself becomes a distraction. But for us as beginners, we need to have that little bit of a watchdog to keep our mind on the object. And eventually also in the development of meditation, we enter the meditation and we apply effort. We're applying effort so that from one moment to the next moment, we can remember the object that we've chosen. Like, let's say it's the breath. We actually have to apply effort to keep the mind on the breath because our inclination to distraction is so great that without effort, we can't keep our mind on one object. So they're the two aspects of meditation, mindfulness and introspection. Now, Shantideva, who was a great Indian yogi and teacher, and he wrote a very important book in Buddhism called The Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He says something which I find really valuable, and that is, he said, if you're just after some momentary happiness, some momentary pleasure, momentary satisfaction, you might as well just go and put all your efforts into gambling and drinking. So when we approach meditation, the same thing applies. It's not about 5 minutes of peace. From a Buddhist traditional point of view, the benefit of meditation is not about 5 minutes or 10 minutes of peace. It's about doing something really worthwhile for yourself. And that's, again, comes back to the motivation. And like Shantideva says, if you're just after a bit of temporary happiness, okay, go down gambling and drinking. Here, we're looking for something that's beneficial. And certainly from a Buddhist point of view, in this tradition, we talk about Dharma practice. Dharma practice being, for people who fall into one of the three scopes or the three categories of practitioner. So the first one is a person who's just focused on having a better life in the future, a better future existence, aiming to have a good rebirth or some sort of future destiny, a future destiny that is a good one. And all of the major religions in the world subscribe to the idea of there being a future destiny, that there is for ourselves some sort of future destiny, and that future destiny is produced, the quality of that future destiny is produced by our ethics. If we have good ethics, we'll have a good future destiny. If we have poor ethics, we'll have a poor future destiny. So Buddhism is on that same page. But in terms of the practitioner, that's called, let's say, the lower scope motivation. Then the second type of practitioner is somebody who understands how the whole of our existence is sort of, let's say, permeated by a underlying ignorance of reality. And so they seek to eliminate that ignorance and to achieve a liberation from that pervasive ignorance. And so that's called a middling scope, a person who seeks a sort of total liberation. And then the third scope of the practitioner is somebody who's fully focused on wanting to benefit others. And so they seek a method or a solution or a personal development to fully be able to benefit others. And so that is the path to enlightenment. But the one thing to notice is that those three different categories of being, none of them are focused on just this life, they're all beyond this life. So we tend to all be totally absorbed in the aspects of this life, becoming wealthy, having a nice car, having a nice partner, getting famous, getting respected, being noticed, being accomplished in this life. So many of our life goals and targets and pride is just based up in phenomena that are just related to this short life, this short life as a human. Right. So that's also something to think about in terms of your motivation. But within all of that, meditation is the tool that enables all of these things to come together, because we need to have the mental power. We need to have the mental power to be able to accomplish any of this, to be able to, to be able to focus on one object, to be able to have the introspection that sees the functioning of anger within me, the introspection to see the functioning of pride and arrogance within me, and how that is faulty, how that leads to faulty behaviour. So, normally we don't have those skills. We have to develop those skills. And so meditation is the tool that enables us to develop those skills. So we'll do some meditation now. Can I ask if anybody's here for the very first time tonight? One, thanks. Good, thanks for coming. Great. So adopt a good, comfortable posture. Main thing is to be comfortable, and some symmetry in your body is important. If you're sitting in a chair, put your 2 feet flat down on the floor or on a cushion, I for myself, I try to find a like a centrality in my being, centrality in my body and my system, let's say. Become aware of where your mind is, what your mind is doing, and bring it within yourself. Bring your mental focus sort of like within yourself. So you let go of the past, you let go of the future, you let go of any thoughts outside, any disturbances, and just gradually let all of the thought go from your mind. And keep doing that. And then when your mind is like free of all these thoughts, turn the attention to your breath. And in particular, turn your attention to the awareness of your breath. Like the mental experience of your breath coming in and going out. And we'll focus on that as the object. And enter with a strong determination to keep the focus on the breath, 100% for the period of the meditation. So let's do that. just relax your concentration a little bit. But just reflect and examine what happened in your meditation. So just have a look at what happened in your meditation. And seeing if it was distraction or sleepiness or loss of the object, if you lost the focal object, then we'll repeat the meditation. And so make a strong effort to overcome those faults in the repeat of the meditation. So we'll just redo the same meditation, but with a strong effort to keep the focus on the breath without any distraction. So for another few minutes, do this meditation. So once more, just relax your concentration, and again examine your meditation. With honesty. Have a clear look at your meditation. What happened? And then just once more, just for a minute or two, we'll again repeat the same meditation with a strong determination to keep the focus on the breath. So just for a short period with a strong determination to hold your focus 100% on the breath. Okay, so you can relax and bring your concentration back to the room. Yeah, so we've got some time now for some discussion or questions or whatever. I'm interested to know, or if any of you would like to share the obstacles that came up in your meditation. You know, what type of obstacle did you experience in your meditation?
I always find it's a strange balance between trying to stay concentrated and focused on the breath, but also being relaxed enough that you're actually kind of getting into a meditative space, I guess. But I just find one thought comes and it's just like it pulls a thread and all of a sudden I'm somewhere else.
Yeah. One of the things you say there, our meditation ideally is in this tradition really much pushes this view. It should be bright and clear. Bright and clear. So sometimes meditative state, and in some traditions that meditative state that people try to cultivate is like a very dull, sort of like a dull state. It's a very non-reactive or non-thing. But in this tradition, we very much sort of emphasize the need that our object should be bright and clear. So the breath should be very clear to us. So that's one thing to say about that. My own obstacles, especially in the first, I like doing the 3 repetitions because, and I'd be interested to know if anybody has an experience that the 3 repetitions are different You know, like that's something maybe we can talk about. But for me, that first burst, I have a huge amount of verbalization going on. You know, not that it's particularly verbalizing anything, but there's just this sort of verbalization. And people are different. You know, different people have different dispositions. So I think for me that mental verbalization is a particular problem that I have. But I mean, maybe you all have different experiences.
I have the same problem I have at 3 a.m. At 3 a.m. I sometimes wake up and think, I didn't do that. You know, I have to write it on a post-it note and go back to sleep.
Yeah.
So I'm fine, you know, I do 3 lots of 7 breaths and then settle in. And then suddenly this really strange thing I've forgotten to do a day ago comes into my mind. And I think, oh, I'll just park that somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think writing it down on a post-it note is good because you close it off.
That's right.
You know, it's gone. You know, like that's probably a good technique. But don't do that in the middle of your meditations. You know, like that's probably not so skillful. You know. Yeah.
I noticed that in my meditation I was quite well focused to the point where I'm quite visual. So I start to get the colour, and so then I start to watch that, and then I'm off train. I'm off track with that.
Yeah.
But that seems to relax me a little bit, and then I notice thought come in and pull me away, and I'm like, whoa, noticing to bring it back. So it's sort of, it's interesting, isn't it, again?
Yeah, I think like you say, you know, especially when we're you know, we have to go through that process of sort of recognising that we've gone off track and then pull it back, you know. But we have to be a little bit cautious about training ourselves in distraction. And that's why if we meditate for too long, we end up with this process of being distracted and then pulling it back, being distracted, pulling back. And at the end of the meditation, you may have just ended up in training yourself in distraction, you know, and that's important to avoid that somehow. So here we meditated for like 15 minutes in total. Probably at home, that's too long. You know, it's probably better to do shorter, so that you don't enter this sort of constant distraction, pulling back, you know, like that's not particularly...
Meditation actually allow it to go. One of my favourite meditations is to reflect.
Yeah.
And so I'll let it wander and I'll go into that. But that's where my
Well,
zone is.
yeah.
Yeah, but the purpose of tonight, I was trying to stay focused and I could
Look,
see how.
there's potentially an infinite number of meditations. You know, there's a lot of different meditations. So here we are choosing one object and we are trying to hold one object. There are other meditations where you look at your mind and you let your mind be free, but you observe what happens in your mind and you try to learn from that process. So there are meditations where you deliberately let your mind be free, but not follow or not engage with the thought. So if you think about what does that mean, it means not entering a discussion or not being dragged by the thought, but just to merely observe your mind, but without engagement. It's quite difficult. It is quite difficult, but there's a huge learning to be had from that meditation. But here, you know, and it's good to be very specific with your meditation. So here we're meditating on the breath, right? If all of a sudden you have these images of Buddhas or angels or whatever sort of exotic things, it's a distraction. And you do not engage. You bring your mind back to the breath. No matter how marvellous your fabricated distraction is, ignore it. You know, that's very important because it's just a product of your mind. You know, and our mind is the worst, most deceiving thing you've ever encountered.
The
Yeah.
energy sort of bring. Also, I found if I kept a visual of the breath, that could be more focused. It was interesting. I guess some of us might want to feel it, some of us might want to hear it, but like keeping our focus on like one sensory input.
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things you say there are very interesting. So the first thing was about, this process of being distracted and then pulling it back. So the observation here is that by being a little bit more determined, then able to hold it a bit longer or a bit more, solidly hold the breath as the object. But also talking about having a visual representation or some other aid to the process of meditation. So there's a very interesting aspect to breathing meditation in different traditions. And so just very briefly, I'll mention this. So let's say there's 3 different approaches to breathing meditation. One of them is, to focus on the breath as though it comes in, comes down, fills your abdomen, then comes up and goes out. So in your meditation, you follow the breath in and out. So you're focusing on the breath, but you're focusing on the breath sort of coming in and going out, right? And then there's a breathing meditation where you're focusing on the sensation of the breath as it comes in, a sensation. It comes in, and to some degree you're focusing on the sensation. The breath comes in and goes out, and your focus is on the sensation. And the third meditation is that we breathe in and we breathe out, and we say to ourselves, I am breathing in, I am breathing out, I am breathing in, I am breathing out. And we focus on that experience of I am breathing in, I am breathing out. So these are 3 different traditions that are in the Buddhist collection of breathing meditations. And so we each have potentially a disposition more for one than another. And so probably one of the things you're saying is that idea of a visual representation of the breath coming in and coming out is appropriate for you, So that's something to experiment with in your meditation. But still, it's good if there's an instruction to follow the instruction. So, as a general principle, it's a good idea if there's an instruction, you follow the instruction. But if you have experience with what suits you best, then it's good to do that as well. So, but good, thanks.
Say you met someone like on a trouble or something like that, and you like obviously a different attitude to you, but if you offer them positive thoughts in your meditation and stuff, like some people go around, they're not very happy, and you have to explore your peace a little bit.
So is your question whether you can influence the mood?
Not really influence, but someone will rough you up or try and rough you up, but you still want to push them, hope they get some, push them no harm as well.
So
I'm just saying, you might not be able to help someone, but you
well,
still want to wish them, you see some people that really, some part of their minds aren't working the best. They go and take it out on a complete stranger or something like that. But you don't want, still want to wish them harm?
I'm not. Well, look.
It was more just you coming to tell me what's going on there.
I'll tell you a story. This is from a teaching Geshe Doga gave once, and the person had asked him this question, that they worked in Tasmania. It was in Tasmania. They worked with people who were quite mentally disturbed, young kids, quite young kids, and they had huge discipline problems. And the teacher, the person was asking Geshe Doga, about techniques to try to handle these kids, like, to be forceful or wrathful or, like quite strict, whether that was a useful technique, because the kids are very troubled. Anyway, Geshe Doga said, it's possible to use wrathful methods, but you have to be extremely skillful and have a really complete and thorough understanding of the circumstances. But no one misunderstands kindness, And that's a really important thing to remember, that even animals recognise kindness if we are kind to them. But wrathfulness is much more difficult to comprehend. And just as a confession of my own sort of behaviour, in a workplace once, I was trying to get a technician to do something, and a good friend of mine who was the supervisor of that area, he was sort of standing there listening to me and me interacting with this technician, and he just said, "Bad dog." And it stuck in my mind, because what he was saying to me is, you're talking to him like he's a bad dog, and that's really inappropriate, So, and it's always stuck in my mind as a very skillful thing to have said, So, so we have to. It's very difficult to be so, but nobody misunderstands kindness, so that's really important to remember. Yeah.
Damien, I sort of often get distracted by the breath itself. I might decide initially to focus, just say, on the breath entering my nose, but then my brain sort of follows it to my lungs, and I focus on the movement.
Yeah.
It shifts in that way.
Yeah, so the observation here is about this sort of changing thing. So this is very important, and the thing to recognise is that you are changing the object of focus. And so my own observations of many of the online meditations that are occurring are that the instruction is rapidly changing the object of focus. Because people will say, focus on the breath, okay? Then feel your abdomen rising and falling. And I'm thinking, no, that's a different object, focus on the breath. And then they say, think of the colour red coming in. No, no, they're changing the object, And so particularly, for the achievement of single point concentration, you have to stick with an object, and that's it, that focus, that object. And so this is to recognise within yourself, this is a distraction. It's sort of like merely focusing on the breath is not enough, and so you become a bit adventurous in changing the object. You want it to be a bit more exciting, a bit more colourful, a bit more engaging, a bit more out there, and all of a sudden you're visualising Buddhas and angels and stuff, the product of your own mind's distraction. So, as boring as it sounds, you stick with the one object, and it's very important. If you want to develop your mental power in meditation, you choose, whatever the object is that you choose for your meditation, the introspection, so this is the role of introspection. The role of introspection is to see that I'm now visualizing colours and movement and this and that, and I've lost my object. So you say to yourself, I've lost my object, bring it back, And I think that's a very important skill to develop, is the overcoming your adventurousness in wanting a more exciting meditation. You have to fight that inclination. So, oh yeah.
So, just with that, do you find for beginners, do you recommend doing, say, multiple shorter form meditations whereby you can say, all right, cool, for one of these 5-minute meditations, allow your mind to explore and really check in on what's happening. If you feel what's happening in your body, that's a really good thing. And then you give yourself space to then move into either immediately after or at a different time of day to try and do just a mindfulness of breath meditation. So you're getting both, because I find I get quite distracted with what's happening in my inner world, how's my body feeling, I'm feeling really tired, and then you try and come back to the breath and like, it seems like a good thing to notice what's happening in your body. So do you find it good to break it up and have smaller meditations, both with intention of mindfulness of breath and then understanding your inner world better?
Yeah, so the question is about doing shorter or different types of meditation. Yes, good to do. But I think you're on the right track of recognising that our attention span is quite limited, but also our wish to be stimulated and excited is a problem. That's something to recognise that, okay, I've done the breathing meditation, what's next? Give me another one, sort of amping it up, wanting to amp it up a bit to something new. It's good to do different meditations, but probably more important to be a little bit devoted to one meditation for a period of time. But having said that, like my own practice is a whole lot of different meditations every day, but within the context of doing different prayers and formulated meditations. So there's a whole heap of different meditations occur in that. But within a meditation, to be very clear about what your object is, and your target is 1 minute or 3 minutes or whatever, and that in that period, that's what you're doing. You're doing that meditation. So in the traditional calm abiding retreat type thing, they say that you do up to 18 sessions a day of short meditations. And they might only be 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something, because it's important to not train your mind in distraction. That's very important. So I think anybody that says that they're meditating for 30 minutes, I know from my own experience, that's 1 minute of meditation and 29 minutes of daydreaming, or, something like that. Like, it's a problem. It's difficult. So it's good to be disciplined. All right, so it's time. So thank you all. Thank you for the questions and the comments. So let's just do a very brief meditation on. So we recollect our motivation. So if our motivation was to benefit others and to develop yourself in order to be able to benefit others. So imagine that all of the virtue of all of us coming together, that this takes the form of white light, like a ball of white light. Everybody's effort, everybody's meditation and thinking, the benefit of all that takes the form of a ball of white light, and then bring it above your own head and let it completely dissolve into you through the crown of your head, completely filling your body with light and with the benefit of this class. So imagine your body completely composed of light. And then thinking about all other living beings, imagine them in front of you and seeing that they want happiness, but they lack happiness, and they want to be free from suffering, but they have suffering. And so then with the thought to benefit them, imagine rays of light radiating out to every living being, bringing them benefit. Then imagine that light returning and dissolving back into you. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you next week. Next week's a public holiday, but the class is still on, so keep that in mind. So I hope you're able to make it. And there should be a cup of tea and maybe some cake up there. Oh, there is some cake. And I look forward to seeing you all next week, so thank you.